Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kate Kirby, CEO of the American Physical Society, and I want to welcome you to our second webinar in a series being organized by APS and led by APS President-elect Jim Gates, who is moderator of today's panel. The title of the webinar is Removing Barriers, Physics in HBCU, MSI, and PBI Communities. The webinar will be structured as follows: 1 hour for introductions and then perspectives of the panelists, then a 10-minute break, and then 50 minutes for Q&A to respond to questions from the audience. Before turning to Professor Stefan Alexander from Brown University, who is president of the National Society of Black Physicists, I want to make everyone aware that this year, APS recognized Morgan State University in Baltimore, Maryland, as an APS historic site. It's the birthplace of the National Society of Black Physicists. And I would like to read the citation. On April 28, 1977, Morgan State University became the birthplace of the National Society of Black Physicists, NSBP. Its founders sought to promote the professional well-being of African-American physicists within society at large and within the international scientific community. They have successfully mentored young Black students to increase their representation in physics and technology. Their persistent professional devotion to inclusion has produced the largest national organization that actively supports African-American physicists. So with that, I'm so delighted to turn it over now to Stefan Alexander, who is the current president of NSBP. Stefan.
Okay, so one of the things I want to do today is to just give a kind of historical perspective of what brings us today at this inflection point in our history. And I want to kind of start with just basically the acknowledgement of some of the pioneers of excellence actually in physics. It's interesting that the very first PhD ever granted in any field to an African-American was in physics. It was given to Edward Alexander Boucher. He received his PhD at Yale University. But unfortunately, he was barred from a career in research. Nonetheless, he was a distinguished teacher. And you know, I'm a legacy of that because the American Physical Society has the Boucher Award. In fact, Professor Gates is also a Boucher Award winner from back in the days. And it's been a very important award in terms of advancing the careers of African Americans in physics. In 1918, the second African American to receive a PhD in physics was Elmer Imes. And Elmer Imes basically was a pioneer in quantum mechanics. He did some of the first experiments to actually confirm the veracity of quantum mechanics. Nonetheless, Imes was not able to get, despite that pioneering work, and as you can see, these two papers published in Astrophysical Journal and Physics Review, and this celebrates the 100th year anniversary of that paper, which was published in 1920. He was not able to get a faculty job. That led him, of course, to found the physics department at Fisk University, thank goodness. And that was also, he created the bridge program, transferring Fisk master's students to the PhD programs at Michigan and NYU. Next slide, please. That leads us into the 70s, which is actually a pivotal decade for Blacks in physics. In 1972, the very first woman to get earn a PhD in physics from the University of Michigan, Dr. Willie Hobbs Moore, wrote a thesis on the vibrational analysis of secondary chlorides, and she had both an academic and a career in industry and business. And of course, one of my mentors, same year, Dr. Shirley Ann Jackson got her Ph.D. in theoretical physics, condensed matter physics, and particle physics from MIT, and was also in the cohort of Jim Gates. And actually, she was a little bit more advanced than Jim in terms of her time. And in fact, Dr. Jackson is now the president of RPI, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and was also, again, another way in which we see the legacies and how they play into our careers in the public, and I mean, out in the present. She was a key person in my deciding to actually run and become the next president of the National Society of Black Physicists. And if for those of us, I encourage you who want to know more and get more information, there is a great, basically, metaverse of much of the Black physicists and their research and careers. You can go onto this website of www.math.buffalo.edu, as you can see on this slide. And I want to say a little bit about that year, 1972. During that time, leading up to 1977, you may ask yourself the question, many people ask, why do we have a National Society of Black Physicists? Some people even criticize, why do Black people want to just have a meeting for themselves, which is not the case. We have many people from the community, internationally and non-Black physicists coming to our meetings every year. The meeting we are approaching our 50th anniversary. We have a national meeting, and this meeting basically is a place where physicists, especially Black physicists, can come together, engage in scientific talks, networking, collaborations, and this is where mentoring happens. We have a long tradition of mentoring. I started as a member when I was 18 years old, 30 years ago, and that's when I first met Professor Jim Gates. He was the chair of Howard University at the time, and he became my mentor over those years. Later on, a collaborator, and now my colleague at Brown. So this is kind of how it works. But if you ask how NSBP came about, I want to look at this quote from James Baldwin, and it says, "I can't believe what you say because I see what you do." You see, back in the 70s, a handful of very prominent and powerful physicists made public that they thought, including Shockley, William Shockley, that they thought for genetic reasons, basically mostly based on the false science of eugenics, that people of African descent are not genetically capable of doing physics. And this basically naturally would concern Black physicists who were doing physics at the time. And so they decided to, to reach out to the APS, American Physical Society at that time, and the APS kind of stayed silent on that. And because of that, they decided to, for lack of a better word, pull themselves up by their own bootstraps with very limited resources, and to have meetings where they would engage each other in scientific talks, mentoring, supporting students, and trying to support each other's careers. And that grew into the National Society of Black Physicists as the organization, which was born at Morgan State. And, but there's been a lot of movement, positive movement by the APS, and it's kind of interesting that no one would have thought back then that the next president of APS would be a Black physicist, Professor Gates. So where are we now today? Where's NSBP now? So here's a picture of our 2019 meeting that took place in Providence in Rhode Island, where Brown University played a key role as a sponsor amongst other sponsors. And you can see we have on the order of over 400 people come to this meeting. And it was a spectacular meeting. We have this meeting every year. And so some of the things that we are doing, I just want to give you a sense of where we're at today and what we're doing into the future. We have this national meeting and it's been very successful. But one of the things that we're seeing based on that we still struggle with issues of inclusivity, being included in the larger community, getting the basic types of support that the panelists will talk about, and as well as supporting HBCUs. and the interaction between them and PWIs, predominantly white institutions, and the Black faculty there and students. But one of the things that we've decided we've been doing is engaging our students and providing research programming in support of partnerships such as the Simon Foundation. As you see, sitting at the center, you'll see a picture of Jim Simons, who is the president of the Simons Foundation. And they have been partnering with us with a program called the Simons NSBP Scholars Program, where we had 28 students this summer engage in research with members of the Simon physicists. And half of those students were from historically Black colleges and universities, and half of the NSBP students were from predominantly white institutions. And we're basically trying to build community and really expand what we do also into the realm of getting students involved in research, really engaging our students in leadership roles, and also supporting our young professional members to really excel and advance their careers, while making sure that we can provide support for more senior people to support their careers and their research, and also engage in mentorship. So, we're going to continue our tradition of mentoring across all levels to promote the quality and excellence. So we're having our next national meeting this November the 5th, begins on November the 5th. And I encourage you all, everybody's welcome to jump on our website, it's on www.nsbp.org for more information, and then you can register. And we look forward to you joining us for a very exciting and scintillating national conference. And so I want to now welcome the next president of the American Physical Society, my colleague, my mentor, Professor Jim Gates.
Thank you, Stefan. I'd like to, first of all, welcome all of our approximately 400 people in the cyber audience who have joined us today. We want this to be an educational opportunity for you to learn about some things. So let me talk a little bit about personal history, and I'll be calling when to change my slides. So in 1969, I was a graduate student, a high school student graduating, and I had wanted to become a physicist since my junior year of high school. And if I had graduated in '68, it is very likely that I would have probably ended up going to a historically Black college or university, because most of the young viewers of this program will not know that 1969 was the first time when African Americans were admitted to places like MIT, and I was fortunate enough to be among that first class. So today I want to take you into a regime most physicists are not aware of. We're the community who tells humanity that our universe is 13.8 billion years old, and we study things like dark matter. So I'm going to take you into some dark matter today by revealing the structure of the African American community involvement in physics. Next slide, please. So the first thing I can do to you is to lay out the topography in some sense. What are the institutions where you can find this involvement? This slide will become part of the archival materials associated with this webinar. So I'm not going to read you the whole list, but as you can see, it starts with Alabama A&M. There are 25 such institutions. Can we have next slide, please? And it ends with Xavier University in Louisiana. So it goes from A to X, not quite to Z. But these institutions have been around for a very long time, and they support African-American undergraduates. And some of them have master's degree programs. Next slide, please. In addition to the historically Black colleges and universities, there are Black serving institutions. And these are institutions that are not necessarily historically Black, but they have a large component of African-American students who participate in their degree programs. And so here we go from Agnes Scott College, a place I'm sure most of the physics community has never heard about, to, next slide please, to Valdosta University. And so there's a universe out there, folks, that if you're interested in making a difference for African-American participation in the physics domain, and you are interested in doing this by partnering with colleagues at historically Black colleges and predominantly Black serving institutions or minority serving institutions, this is the universe I would lay out for you to reach out. And some of you are probably within close geographical locations, and you can exercise this. Of course, with cyberspace, physical distance doesn't actually matter. You just need to know what your target is. And so I would encourage viewers to think of these places as places for opportunity. Next slide, please. And there are 4 historically Black colleges who actually have PhD programs. Alabama A&M University, Florida A&M University, Hampton University, and Howard University. And I have to, at this point, I have to take a little bit of pride because for 2 of those universities, namely Florida A&M and Hampton University, back in the 90s and early 2000s, there were state visits from authorizing organizations at the state level, which actually have to endorse the creation of a PhD program. And the programs at Florida A&M, as well as the program at Hampton University, I chaired those visiting committees. So I have been involved in this part of the universe for a very long time. Next slide, please. I would like to close by pointing out some things. One, this quote by Elie Wiesel, the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. The opposite of art is not ugliness, it's indifference. And the opposite of faith is not heresy, it's indifference. So in fact, if we're going to make a difference in moving our community closer together, we have to get past our indifference. Now, is this going to be easy? Well, for this, I draw on the quote of John F. Kennedy. He said, "We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills, because that challenge is one that we are willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one which we intend to win, and the others too." I think we as a community can commit and repeat this statement about our goals of knitting together physicists independent of ethnicity, independent of gender. And is it going to be easy? Well, as he said, no. We're going to do this because it is going to be hard. So let us dedicate ourselves to that. Thank you. So I'm the moderator, I'm told, of this program. So what I'd like to do next is welcome our next speaker will be Professor Quentin Williams of Howard University. If you could get the next slide up, Mark, we'd appreciate that very much. And then I'm going to turn the presentation over to Quentin.
Okay, thank you, Jim. While the slides are being positioned, I'd like to first say welcome to my esteemed panel of colleagues there. And thank you and Kate and APS for hosting this webinar. It's something that's very important and very timely now. So with this webinar, there are several themes that we would like to hit upon. And one of those is what I'm going to be talking a little bit about. That's a faculty-centered approach towards increasing diversity in physics. So what can you as an individual faculty member do to increase diversity in physics? The next slide that we'll see is my, I guess, foray into just a little information to give a little context to where we are. So we're not going to give the whole full pathology of how we got to this position of not having very much diversity, but I do want you to see some numbers and to appreciate how severe this situation is. So in 2018, according to the latest data that I was able to pull up, there were 1,988 doctorates awarded or earned in physics in the United States. And out of that, only 13 were awarded to African Americans. So Professor Gates mentioned the HBCUs, the 4 programs that have doctoral programs in physics, and they produce actually a fair bit of the numbers that you see in that 13. And this only represents about 0.65% or less than 1% of the PhDs in physics that were awarded actually to African Americans in 2018. Next slide. So the next slide is going to show you, go one back please, Thank you. The next slide, this slide is showing you a little bit about the pipeline. So I always look at what's going into the pipeline because what goes in is really a big determiner of what's going to be coming out. So in terms of the bachelor's degrees awarded in physics, there has been an explosion of degrees that have been awarded in the US, in physics there, that is. And the left panel shows the change percentage in terms of the number of degrees that were awarded, broken out by race. So what you can see from this graph is that roughly from 1995 to 2020, I guess about 25 years, the number of degrees, bachelor's degrees for all students is basically doubled. However, if you look at the bottom line, which represents African Americans, you see that percentage change hasn't changed very much at all. It was flat for up until about 2013 or 14 or so, and then it's starting to tick up slightly. But it's not a huge change. And over on the right, you might ask, well, how about in terms of African Americans who are earning degrees in STEM? So this is a subset of the STEM fields. And you can see the bottom curve is physics, and then it ticks up a little bit higher than math. So we're doing a little bit better than math, but we are really dragging very far behind a lot of other disciplines, and especially if you look at a lot of the other races. Let's go to the next slide. So this next slide, I think is very telling. There are about 754 physics departments in the US. And of those, you have about 194 that actually award the PhD in physics. There were only 13 African Americans who received PhDs in physics in 2018 out of 194 programs. So for me, that tells that we have a very bad systemic issue that needs to be addressed. It's not just those institutions, but it's, I think, the entire education system, but we'll stay within our universe. So let's look at the next slide and try to get an idea of what role HBCUs are playing in terms of African Americans earning degrees in physics. So again, we'll look at the science and engineering doctorates being earned by African Americans. And if you look at the column there on the left panel, you'll see that the top 10 institutions are historically Black colleges and universities, HBCUs. And only 2 of that list of HBCUs, if you go all the way down to the top 20, are categorized, Carnegie classified as research high activity. That's Howard and Jackson State. So in your laboratories, you might, wonder, or you might say, well, I don't have any African American students because I don't really know where to find them, okay? And so let's look at where African Americans are located. So African Americans make up about roughly 13% of the US population. And if you look at this map of the US, you'll see that African Americans are located primarily in the deep southern states. This is not to say that there aren't any in Texas or in Illinois, think about Chicago, or you think about Detroit, but this is where the bulk of African Americans are densely populated, in the southern states. So let's go to the next slide. So looking at this, we see that HBCUs play a vital role in producing African American scientists and engineers. In fact, they're a key portal for making the change that the community seeks. And even Albert Einstein knew this back in 1946 when he lectured at Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. Next slide. So what can we do? Just a small vignette of some activities that an individual faculty member can do. First thing is, if you look around the typical laboratory, you will probably not find African American students. So one of the things that needs to happen is an attitude change. Let's stop being indifferent. It's not someone else's problem to fix. This is a problem that the whole community needs to take a part in solving. And it is your professional responsibility to help solve this issue. Active recruitment is something that everyone can participate in. So now you know where the students are located and you see that the potential is there. to actually bring more into the pipeline. So let's go in and use our RU programs and some internship programs to bring more in. We can partnership with HBCUs, MSIs, and PBIs, and they're located around the country and deeply in the South, which you've seen on the map. And you can serve as the leader of change in your department. So how do you begin? You begin by tapping into a colleague or someone that can help you connect with HBCUs, MSIs, and PBIs. And if you don't have a direct contact, then please reach out to the NSBP, and the organization can readily help you connect with other programs at these institutions. So with that, I'll say thank you, which is the next slide. And I look forward to answering any questions that there may be during the Q&A session. Thank you. Back to you, Professor Gates.
Thank you very much, Quentin. You were great on the time. You didn't even give me a chance to get my hook out to call you to cease your presentation. So we next turn to Dr. Marta Dark-McNeese, who will present some really, I think, important comments about what this webinar is trying to address. So Marta, please take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Gates. Good afternoon. My name is Marta Dark-McNeese, and I'm a professor at Spelman College, which, as you might not be aware, it is a private liberal arts college for women. So I want to talk to you a bit about who our students are as you're thinking about ways to diversify your programs. Next slide, please. We are a small department, as you can see. In addition to the 6 instructors, faculty, and a lab coordinator, we will typically have 3 or 4 part-time adjunct instructors. And looking at the list of our physics students each semester, you can see the majority are from service courses. Typically, we'll have 2 to 6 students in our upper level physics courses, but in spite of our small numbers of physics majors, we have been successful at producing Black women who receive bachelor degrees in physics, and hopefully we're competitive with Dillard and Xavier, who the media has recently featured as top producers of Black women physicists. So as we are talking about ways to increase the diversity in physics, next slide, please. I think it's time we recognize it cannot just be up to HBCU faculty to do this. It's going to require faculty at PWIs to be involved and committed as well. So some of the things we should be thinking about are removing barriers. And in order to do that, let's acknowledge what some barriers might be that our students face. Our students might be older than your typical college graduate, as they may have worked before starting college, or they may have taken a few years off before completing their degree. Some students also might have more family responsibilities than your average graduate student. For instance, caring for sick family members or elderly or children. And recently I had a student who would need to leave the state twice a week in order to return home to South Carolina, help her mother go to her medical treatments, and care for her afterwards. So in spite of these demands, she was able to, with help working around this medical issue, she was able to complete her degree. Our students might have financial barriers. They work part-time. I've seen a few try to carry on full-time jobs while they're students. If you think about the average loan balance for a senior at Spelman is about $26K, which is of course a huge concern for the students, many of which are Pell Grant eligible and don't have that strong financial cushion to fall back on. So as you're thinking about how to create pathways of success for the students, think about some additional concerns they might be dealing with. Are your programs and faculty able to support them? Now, I also want to mention here some barriers that might need to be built in order to protect our students. So I call them seawalls. You might have a colleague in your department that could be considered somewhat toxic, someone who is not going to be encouraging, someone who might be downright discouraging towards students. And I think we need to think about protecting those students, if we can, from certain faculty. faculty members who one of my students went to in a post-baccalaureate program, who told her after 2 years she would not be a success in a PhD program. She left, went elsewhere for a few years, started a PhD program, and she did finish. So let's support our students. Another point to bring up, as Quentin mentioned, building relationships with HBCUs for collaboration are critical. In STEM at Spelman, we received quite a few requests from faculty wanting to get our best students. But all of our students have their choice of options in terms of where they might want to go. So I need to know that my students are going to be supported if they come to your institution. And if things get tough, is there a supportive faculty member for them to go to? Also, are there some additional things that we can do at the HBCU to prepare them for specific needs? So thinking of a collaboration we have where faculty from both institutions work together. They developed a course in stellar astrophysics, and we've had several students go on to their summer program. It's too early to say regarding the PhD if they will go there yet. And as I told Dr. Gates when he first invited me to participate today, if I could somehow reduce the number of random emails that I get, I will be happy with this. So I get these all the time asking me to join a grant proposal, join an REU proposal, and you know that faculty to faculty communication is important. So from the PWI, come and visit the HBCU, meet the students, meet the faculty. Even if you're coming from a top tier R01, you should still engage. And the HBCU faculty can learn quite a bit about your institution and the people at your institution, having experienced some of those visits where the faculty were dismissed by the visitor. So these are things we need to know. And Dr. Dobbins will talk to you more about some of the more positive ways this can happen. Next slide, please. So in my last comments, I just want to address what one person can do, not the whole department, but someone who wants to be an ally or a better ally. And it's very simple, just listen. People are trying to tell you something, are you listening? We can't solve these problems until we understand each other and can work together. A few years back, I was on an APS committee during the unrest in Ferguson, Missouri, and APS had been contacted by some of the membership, physicists of color, younger people who were experiencing difficulty around this and were looking for support from APS. It seemed at first that those discussions did not go anywhere, and I tried to speak up, even though I was very uncomfortable, but I didn't feel people were really hearing what I was saying. So these conversations on diversity and systemic racism can be uncomfortable, but just get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And instead of maybe trying to move to another topic, just deal with the discomfort. And also, if you see something going wrong, speak out about it. If you see a situation where students might not be treated well, or are they experiencing microaggressions, perhaps they're even unable to break into study groups until they prove themselves to other students. I've heard that from some of our graduates. Would they have to do the same thing if they were male or of another race? If that's happening, speak out. So back to that committee, it wasn't until another member of the committee, I believe he was from Germany, spoke out strongly about Ferguson. And once he spoke out, it became a real energized discussion. So it was encouraging to know that at least one person, two, including Kate, really listened to what I was saying. So again, if we can take some of these small steps together, we will make progress, and we need to make progress. So I would like to hand it back to Dr. Gates. Thank you, and I look forward to the discussion after the break.
Thank you. It's amazing to me that I don't have to tell people when their time is up. Usually in presentations like this, as a moderator, you're trying to figure out how to be polite and yet get your colleagues to adhere to time limits. You folks have been amazing so far. So next, we have Dr. Tabbetha, Professor and actually Interim Provost, Dr. Tabbetha Dobbins. And Tabbetha, I think, is going to to have a rather different take that we hope can help some of our audience members understand better what it is that we're after. Go ahead, Tabbetha, you have the floor.
Okay, well, thank you. You just gave me a promotion. I'm not interim provost, I'm interim vice president for research and dean of the graduate school. But thank you so much for this invitation. And I'm just gonna echo some of the sentiments that you've already heard from my colleagues and in particular, Dr. Marta Dark-McNeese, in terms of the interactions between the primarily white institution faculty and the HBCU, PBI, and minority serving institutions. Again, my name is Tabbetha Dobbins, and I'm at Rowan University as interim vice president for research and dean of the graduate school. I'm also a professor in the Department of Physics and Astronomy as my home department. And I was produced by an HBCU, Lincoln University. And in fact, Lincoln University is the first HBCU. In addition, my connection to HBCUs goes on because I was a faculty member for 9 years at Grambling State University as an assistant and then as an associate professor there. So with my time today, I want to give you 2 take-home messages. And the first is really echoing those of Dr. Marta Dark-McNeese, and that is that the interaction at the faculty level across institutions has to look beyond just the student exchange and the feeder of students into the PhD programs or into the RAU programs or what so have you at the primarily white institution. We need to have more faculty to faculty engagements, whether that's exchanges with time, extended time spent in the research labs, or whether that's visits to the campuses in a mutual way, vice versa, the primarily white institution faculty visiting the minority serving institution or HBCU campus, or vice versa, hosting faculty members to give talks or to spend some time at the primarily white institution or at your institution. The second take home I want you to take with you, I guess it's a take home, is to build these relationships, not just with other physics departments, but begin to look at the adjacent disciplines. So you'll hear a little bit out of my story if there is time, but I started out as a physics bachelor's degree, and I ended up in materials science and engineering in my master's and my PhD. So these related disciplines are also very fruitful for you to build relationships with. So I want to tell you a few stories, and I have 3 of them. Hopefully there's time for all 3. So at Lincoln University, I was part of the LASER program. That's the Lincoln Advanced Science and Engineering Recruitment Program. And that gained funding by Dr. Willie Williams. And many of you from the NSBP community know him or know of him. Well, that program aimed to form a 3+2 bridge program between the basic sciences at Lincoln University and the engineering programs at primarily white institutions that were nearby in the state of Pennsylvania. Now, what I learned back in those days firsthand was that the successful 3+2 programs and the successful relationships with the PWI, the primarily white institution, had faculty members who had formed partnerships and friendships across campuses just beyond the transfer of students from one to another. And that if those relationships were not as close or not developed, it tended to end up that the student returned to Lincoln University to complete their degree or did not complete at all. And this was not a good scenario if they did not complete at all. But we will always have our students to complete their degree. We'll always have our students to return if needed. So the key example I want to highlight from that interaction was the relationship between Dr. Subarayo in the Department of Chemistry at Lincoln University and Dr. Rustam Roy in the Department of Material Science at Penn State University. As a result of their friendship and their interaction, their close interaction, approximately 4 to 6 students from Lincoln University, completed their master's degree ultimately at Penn State University. And I just want to point out that Dr. Rustam Roy is the same Dr. Roy who founded the Materials Research Society. And subsequently, I ultimately ended up entering the Material Science and Engineering department at Penn State University to complete my degree there. So keeping an eye on time, it looks like I won't get through all of the stories that I have to tell you. The second story I wanted to tell you about was my time at Grambling State University, where I was also a joint faculty 50-50 at Louisiana Tech University. And in that capacity, I had research labs in a state-of-the-art building so that my Grambling students, my HBCU students, would be able to seamlessly integrate with all the resources that were offered at Louisiana Tech University. Just to be mindful of time, I shortened that story, and you can ask me more about it in the Q&A, but I just want to finalize with the other points of emphasis. So I attended graduate school for material science and engineering, first at the University of Pennsylvania, then at Penn State University. And I think it's very important that as you open these relationships and as you open these doors for students to go either into 3+2 programs with 2 bachelor's degrees, or it go into 3+2 programs with a bachelor's and a master's degree at your institution, that you are aware that there are many adjacent and related disciplines, and that you begin to build in that direction as well. There's material science, inorganic chemistry, biophysics, mechanical engineering, to name a few. So with my time running short, I think I only have a minute left. I'll just recap that it's important to build these relationships so that you're building a structure where the faculty members are interacting with one another, and it gives a home to the students. It gives a welcoming home to the students when you build in that way, and that you're also building across adjacent disciplines. And I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have during the Q&A, and I'm watching the chat box, the Q&A chat box, for any questions that may come along. Thank you.
And thank you, Tabbetha. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful presentation. Let me just say that your final comment about watching the chat box is very important to all of our participants. So you should definitely watch the chat box. There are things going on there. Next, and by the way, you did it too. So far, everyone's gotten an A+ for keeping the time. So I'm watching the time. Everyone's getting an A+. This is like the class full of the overachiever kids. So this is amazing to watch. Okay, so next on our program, we have Dina Stroud, who is intimately involved in the operation of the Fisk-Vanderbilt program. So she's going to tell you some things. Remember in the slide that Dr. Alexander showed, Fisk has been at this since the 1930s, folks. So it's 90 years of tradition at Fisk, and Dina is now following the footsteps of illustrious creators of the programs. So Dina, take it away.
All right, thank you so much. And I just want to, I want to thank you, Dr. Gates, for that introduction and the invitation to be here today. As for the goals of the webinar, I want to share, replicable hallmarks from existing partnerships between R1 and HBCUs that we've learned from the Fisk-Vanderbilt Master's to PhD Bridge program. So the next slide, please. So for those of you that aren't familiar with the Fisk-Vanderbilt Bridge program, it was founded in 2004 by Dr. Arnold Berger and Dr. Kayvon Stassen at Fisk and Vanderbilt respectively, and since 2015 has been headed at Vanderbilt by Dr. Kelly Hawley Bockelman. So the mission of the program is to increase the number of underrepresented minorities in the STEM workforce in the academy. And students come from all over the country to do a fully funded master's degree that includes research and courses at both Fisk and Vanderbilt. So during the master's phase, they apply to PhD programs at Vanderbilt and other institutions as well. They've bridged to places like UC Berkeley, Yale, UT Austin, University of Wisconsin-Madison. And so while our program only takes approximately 4 to 6 astronomy and physics students a year, even these small gains in absolute numbers have a significant impact, as we saw from the earlier slides. According to the numbers reported from APS, of the 24 PhDs awarded to African Americans in physics and astronomy in 2014 and 2017, so half of those students came through the Fisk-Vanderbilt Bridge. Next slide, please. So to date, we've enrolled 153 students. This is a very diverse population with 58% African American, 23% Hispanic and Latinx. So notably 58% of the students have been female, and that's a trend that people are seeing across the board, and it's certainly something that we've seen in the last few years. And I would approximate that about 95% of the students are from underrepresented or underserved groups, such as low-income first generation, or report physical and learning disabilities. So next slide, please. So just briefly, I want to touch on program outcomes. So far, we have awarded 79 physics master's degrees and 30 PhDs in physics, astronomy, and materials science. We've got a 90% retention rate for the PhD and an 8-year completion rate, PhD completion rate of 84%. So these numbers are much better than the national averages, and it's important to point out that these students were selected without the use of the general or physics subject GRE or GPA as criteria. So next slide. So our applications are reviewed by a committee of faculty and administrators from both Vanderbilt and Fisk. We have a score sheet that we use with a rating of 1 through 5 for each of these 3 items: the personal statement, the transcript, and letters of recommendation. So within the personal statement, we look for communication skills, especially around their research experience. We want very clear motivations for the PhD and defined long-term goals. As part of transcript review, we look to see that the students have a solid academic base to work from. And so this is more about the exposure to the topics and the depth of the courses they have had than the grades in the classes necessarily. Right, and we look at the overall trajectory of the GPA to sort of indicate persistence and improvement, and also to note maybe there was some particular point where the student got off track and then worked hard to get back on. So finally, in the letters, we're specifically reading for evidence of curiosity or taking ownership in research, as well as work ethic or fire in the belly for the PhD. So the scores are then used to decide on candidates. We do 30-minute interviews. Everyone's asked the same set of 7 questions that probe for non-cognitive attributes. It's highly competitive to now with about a 10 to 15% acceptance rate. And so there is no shortage of candidates out there available. And we do participate with the APS Bridge Program application pool as well. And so that's something that people might want to explore. So I want to just remind you that these students, they don't look perfect on paper. They have the drive and the potential, and they need the opportunity and support for development. And in this way, you're expanding the pool of talent available, right? So next slide, please. But as we've heard in the last 2 talks, it is critical to understand that this does not end at admissions. There are intentional mentoring activities and opportunities for building a mentor network. So for example, during the master's phase, I meet with each student every semester, including the summer, to ensure that they are making progress to their goals and the program requirements. And this building of trust it takes time, but it's fundamental. And the students not only work with me, but they also have available to them the co-directors, assistant director, program coordinator, the program steering committee, and others in addition to their advisor. And we also have a mentor mixer event that allows students to engage with near peers and faculty to identify additional mentors. There's a volunteer student welcoming committee, and the student cohort itself is very important. So the cohort really creates a touchstone, and it reduces isolation and provides a lot of support. So next slide. So, once you have students, you really want to build community. The literature clearly demonstrates that a sense of belonging promotes retention. And we really try to make all of our practices very evidence-based and to stay in touch with recent literature. So we start from the beginning, not only by using the language of family, but by being genuinely interested in our students as people beyond their science. We kick off the year a couple weeks before the start of classes with a boot camp that not only functions as a math and sort of coding refresher, but as bonding shared experience. And the students begin to work together early on, and they all take part in a year-long professional skills course where we are open about topics such as imposter syndrome, stereotype threat, and more recently, discrimination in STEM higher education. There are planned social activities, there's occasional community service or outreach opportunities, and in non-pandemic times, we have a full gathering of the community for a student-organized day of student talks and posters with a keynote from a program alum. That's our Bridge Research Celebration Day. It's also important to recognize the achievements of the students because they are the center of the program. It's their work and achievements that are then reflected in overall program success. So we send on a monthly newsletter that notes publications and fellowships, or travel grants, poster awards, and also personal announcements like engagements or babies. So we really do care about the whole student. Additionally, we also send out full email list announcements of major events like master's and PhD graduations, and current students at other institutions and alumni can be part of the list. And so these emails, as well as our events, help keep us connected. So next slide. So I just would like to leave you with some of more personal recommendations for actions based on what I have learned over my 8 years of executive director. One of the first things that you can do is to take a look at your department admission practices and consider where you can take a more holistic approach. You know, the addition of even brief interviews provides a much fuller picture of the student. Many times we'll think things are going to come out one way, we'll do the interviews and we'll see so much more and be able to really make a better, make a better connection for what is right for the program. And you don't have to be as geographically close as Fisk and Vanderbilt to form a partnership with an HBCU or other minority serving institutions. And there is so much to be learned by these primarily white and R1 institutions about the culture of care and the level of research being done at HBCUs. And so make any collaboration a mutually beneficial one. It's absolutely worth the engagement. So our ongoing social science research project from our NSF, also a funded Center of Excellence, it indicates that the students' level of engagement with the program and their cohort and the advisor is less than the specific events or activity that really tracks. So the engagement that tracks with sort of success in the program. So being intentional about engagement will boost the retention of your students. And I strongly recommend that faculty seek mentoring and cultural competence training. These are readily available, they're highly beneficial, and they're a short-term investment for long-term returns. And I encourage you, as the other folks have done, to listen to your students. Consider an anonymous department climate survey, or get the students together for a training needs assessment. You can improve the environment for all students and make a more inclusive and welcoming place. And finally, we must recognize the daily racism faced by our African American students and the impact that it has on their physical and mental well-being. We all need to work on understanding more about systemic racism and anti-racist practices if we intend to make lasting change. These actions take time, but they don't cost anything. These students don't need fixed. They need the door to be opened and given support as they work and learn and grow into productive, independent physicists. And I'll end there and thank you so much for your time today.
Okay, so another A+ performance. Thank you, Dina, so much. You said so much in your presentation that's important, and I'm sure during the Q&A we're going to return to a number of the comments. Next, I have Professor Carol Scarlett, who is going to speak to us, and she has some lessons from lived experiences in removing barriers to achieve diversity. Scarlett, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gates, and thank you so much for inviting me to be here. As everyone said, I'm so delighted, like the other panelists, to have had this opportunity. And that said, I'd like to talk a little bit about, as a professor from an HBCU, historically Black college and university, there are some things that we've learned about our student pool and about what makes for success. And so hopefully I can touch on some of the points that my earlier co-panelists have touched on, but also expand on some of the things that we can do, especially at the undergraduate level, to ensure that our students are shoring up their backgrounds in a way that make them competitive and provide the best educational model, because we'd like to see all of them go on to get a PhD, or at least to be successful in whatever STEM career that they have chosen. Can I go to the next slide, please? Okay, so being at a HBCU, I think someone has mentioned earlier that one of the things that we see is we have a student population that is sometimes older. Sometimes students have financial issues, and therefore access to being able to just sit down and study can be compromised. And in addition to that, a lot of our students are the first person in their immediate family to go to college. And this makes a tremendous difference in terms of their perception and just in terms of how they study and how they acquire information. So once upon a time, I was a faculty member, had the pleasure of being a faculty member, I should say, at the U.S. Military Academy, West Point. And it was there that I learned about studies in how humans sitting down and reading over material and pouring through material, there's a strong correlation between the amount of time that a person puts into reviewing material and how well they retain it and how well they're able to use it. And so one of the things that we've implemented at Florida A&M University is the use of educational support models to make sure that our undergraduate students that are facing those gateway courses, in fact, this picture that you see is a group of undergraduate students studying for calculus, but to make sure that these students are able to be successful in those courses, because that sets them up for the rest of their STEM career, and that determines how they're going to look on paper when they leave our undergraduate institution and they have to apply to these PhD programs. Now, fortunately for FAMU, we are one of the 4 HBCUs that happens to have a PhD program. And so we are also looking for students to come in, from anywhere. We have students that come from Florida State. We have students that come from California, but from anywhere to join our PhD program. But at the undergraduate level, it is so important to make sure that your students are supported, whether that be through a learning assistant program or through tutoring service. I had the pleasure of being a principal investigator on a grant from the Department of Education that allowed us to set up supplemental instruction in calculus. And these are actually some of the students that I got a chance. This makes a difference in the world. What we saw in our SI program, students were twice as likely, students who participated in SI who came once a week for at least 4 weeks over the course of a semester were twice as likely to get an A. So it speaks volumes about the connection between having these educational supports and having students do well. Next slide, please. Now, I happen to be an experimental nuclear and particle physicist. So beyond just starting the students out and making sure they get through the gateway, the next hurdle is making sure they have research experience that allow them to do, in my case, I do experimental work, so I like the hands-on research, but also computational research. At some earlier point in my career, I worked at Brookhaven National Laboratories. So I already knew that all of the national laboratories offer programs for undergraduate students to come in and to get research expertise. What you see here are examples of the NSLS, which is the National Synchrotron Light Source. I have my graduate student, Stacy Ann, who will soon be finishing her PhD in physics. So we will be adding her to the list of African-American PhDs. She's shown here working in one of the Brookhaven laboratories. And I have had an opportunity to bring scores of undergrads from FAMU, as well as graduate students, to Brookhaven and to some of the other laboratories so that they could engage in research activities. In some cases, we have the resources at FAMU to allow them to engage in similar research experience, but in most cases, we just don't have the scale. And so tapping into the infrastructure that exists is so important, and is something I would encourage anyone working with students, but particularly with minority students, because often there is a lack of opportunity due to systemic racism, and often there's a lack of those students being pushed to pursue these research opportunities. It's a great way to tap into the infrastructure that exists, is to go through these national laboratory programs, make sure that your students can shore up their background, make sure they have all of the skills that it takes to be successful once they finish their undergraduate degree, so that they can go on into their careers. Next slide, please. And just a shout out to some of the other places. You can see here that one of the other crowning jewels of the national laboratory system is that many of them have made significant efforts to try to bring in faculty members from all over, particularly from HBCUs and MSIs, and to work collaboratively with those faculty members to make sure that students are getting what they need. And so you can see here that there's not just 1 or 2 labs, Brookhaven I mentioned, but there are lots of labs that are willing to work with faculty and willing to help develop student talent. And last slide, please. And finally, I would just point out that where we are today is a result of long-term neglect to include women and African Americans. And that's what's brought us to this point, where we have 0.065 or 0.65% African Americans receiving PhDs in physics, when we make up 13% of the population. We have to look at this. To be globally competitive, the US has to use the talent that it has. At some point in our past, we could tap into other countries' talents. We could brain drain. We could get the best students from India and China and other places. And to some extent, we still can. But what everyone should become aware of is all of those countries, just like us, want to build up their infrastructure. All of them want to be at the top of cybersecurity, at the top of research, at the top of medicine. And so for us to maintain our level, our standard of technology, our level of living, our access to world resources and to all that's brought, we've got to use our own talent too. It should not be the case that it is easier for someone to come from another country, and if they're not a woman or a minority, it is easier for them to get research dollars in our country. And I think that the solutions to being able to tap into the talent pool that is in this country has to center around faculty getting better access to resources, has to center on collaborations with all of our institutions, and there also has to be opportunities provided to our students from day one that enable them to be successful from the undergrad all the way through. I think you'll hear people talk about a leaky pipeline, where we get students that become undergrads and then they don't go on to grad school, or they go on to grad school, but then they don't get the right postdoc, or they get the right postdoc, but then getting an academic position is very difficult. And so to fix the leaky pipeline, we've got to focus on making sure at each step of the process, we don't lose people, especially not to racism. We also have to fix this by making sure at each step of the process, we shore up the resources and collaborative efforts between the larger community and our faculties everywhere, but especially at the HBCUs that are turning out the majority right now of our African American students. And on that, I'll yield back my time.
Thank you very much. First of all, I owe you an apology, Professor Scarlett. I called you Scarlett, but your first name is Carol, so please accept my apology for that oversight. First of all, I want to alert everybody, we were at 3:05, so we've had some leakage, but I would like to allow our last speaker, Professor Willie Rockward, who is at Morgan State, the birthplace of the National Society of Black Physicists, to have his time to speak to our audience. let me just say it is now 3:05, so that will run us through 3:13. We will take our 10-minute break at the conclusion of Professor Rockward's comments, and I'll close it out. Professor Rockward, you are now on.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. I am Willie Rockward, and I am glad to be with you all today. Yes, and I want to thank my colleagues, my panelists, and colleagues on the panel and everything for making my job much easier. So I don't have much to say to you because I'll be saying a little bit of what all of them have said, but I will focus it more towards a student-centered approach. And it's kind of based off a model that came over my lifetime as a faculty called the CARE model. It started when I was faculty for the past 20 years at Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia. And the last 7 years of that stay, I was the chair of the department, starting in 2011 on through 2018. And now I am the chair, professor and chair at Morgan State University in Baltimore, Maryland. So let's get going and let's share some of the things that we have. Next slide. All right, just want to give you a little insight quickly on APS statistics on departments that produce most, top producers of African Americans physics bachelors each year. And here's the numbers from 2014 to 2016. They do a three-year survey and do an average of that. And you'll see at the top of it, Liz Morehouse College. That was during the time I was serving as a chair there. But then also on that list right there of the 13 institutions, 12 of them are HBCUs, and one is a PWI. But you see the numbers, the output of those there. And then when you look at the next, the neighboring data for this recent 3 years, 2017 through 2019, you see that they're the top 10. So in order to make this list, you have to have averaged at least three graduates with physics degrees over the course of that 3-year period, averaging three per year, or well, an average of 3 over those 3 years. So as you see also at the top of that list again is Morehouse, and Morehouse numbers have increased tremendously, mainly because we were using the model of CARE. Now, just be honest with you, I was using the model of CARE way back in 2001, 2002, which probably started our trend at Morehouse. But nevertheless, but you see a difference now in these new numbers that, hey, of the top 10, these top 10 producers, 7 of them are HBCUs and BSIs, Black Serving Institutions, and the other 3 are predominantly white. So that means there's a shift that's going on in the community where predominantly white institutions, research-one institutions are having more underrepresented minorities, in particular African Americans, coming into their physics programs. And so then that you can make the numbers are small, but you can make a major difference with using some of these same techniques. Next slide. Oh yeah, also on that slide, previous slide, go back just one more time. As you may see, Morgan State is not on that slide yet, but I'm going to predict that they will be on the next set of data because we are using the same model at Morgan State. My faculty there have came together as a team, have accepted it, and we are moving full steam ahead with this model. And I'll share it with you in a moment. Next slide. Now, this also is just giving us some basic data that most of us are already familiar with. Over the past 20 years, as you can see, the number of bachelor's degrees by African Americans in physics, percentage-wise, has not really changed much. It's fluctuating between 3 and 5, really 3 and 4, and we just start getting an uptick to start pointing towards that 5%. And I do believe through this webinar, through the energy and the things and the dynamics that's going on in our physics community, I believe that tick is going to go forward past 5 into 6% or even 7%, especially with all the energies and programs and things that we're coming together on, especially like the Team Up report, the EP3 coming out. It's a lot of things that's going on, but we as a collective have to begin to move forward and removing these barriers so that we can provide more opportunities for our underrepresented students, African-American, students of color, students brown and black, but also of all of our students. Even we lose in the physics communities, even losing students, our traditionally white students are not coming into our, not doing well in our community. So we got to pull all our things together and we're going to make a big difference. Next slide. So here's the model. Here's the student-centered approach that evolved during my earlier career at Morehouse. And I call it the CARE model. Care, because that's what it comes down to, that we care about our students. We care about our students, and it's broken up in an acronym. As you can see, each letter stands for what we are focusing upon to give a holistic perspective to our students, and not just our students, our department, also our faculty, and as we push forward, this is what it's all about in physics, okay? The C in CARE stands for curriculum and climate. Curriculum and climate. Yes, we focus on the curriculum. When you're dealing with smaller numbers in smaller departments, you got to have a fixed but yet flexible course availability for these students, because sometimes we normally try to stay on this regular, offer this course every other semester. You may not get the numbers in that because you have a smaller program. When you have a much larger program, it may not be a major issue, but you still need to be somewhat nimble, somewhat flexible to where if you need to offer another course in a non-traditional semester, you can still do that. So that helps the students to see that, one, you care about their time to completion and helps them to move along. Plus it helps the faculty becomes more engaged to say that, okay, I know faculty X normally teach classical mechanics, but hey, if we get enough students next semester, I can get my dibs at that course. So it gives us a chance to start getting engaged in different ways. And so the curriculum, but also then we get into refreshing the curriculum, that we start seeing that this curriculum that we had is still back from before I was undergrad at Grambling. But now, we have to design or remodify our curriculum such that it reflects some modern and known career paths that students may really have an interest in. We just got to come to exception that everything is not going to be exactly graduate school. Many students will go into other pathway initially when they finish, but then they may come back into graduate school. Okay, moving through that. So remember that we can design our department's climate, but it has to be more welcoming, caring, and inclusive. Guided formula to be inclusive, which leads me to our advisement. Advisement is more than just academic advisement, but it leads into our career mentoring. Okay, I'm not going to cover every single one of these, but I will need to make sure that this student-centered approach hits the key things that helps the students to remain in the program and to move forward. Recruitment, retention, research, and rewards. Okay, the students need to see all of this built in that aura. It helps us recruit. Go into the high schools, the local high schools, sign up there, faculty visit, go connect with the high school physics teacher. And sometimes they're not a physics teacher at a lot of schools, so sometimes you connect with the math teacher and things that are the science teacher and things of that nature. Make sure your students get student organizations involved. Get in organized chapters of Sigma Pi Sigma or Society of Physics Students or even NSBP. Help them to encourage them to organize these chapters and to get them engaged. Many of my colleagues already mentioned about other mentoring strategies and things like that, but essentially you're building, you have a community building events for the entire, your entire department. Likewise, so that way it creates a family environment and it really shows that you care, not only their academic growth, but they're also their preferred personal and professional growth. And then last but not least, the E. The E is extremely important. That's where the extras come in. You continue to hold the bar of excellence up for the students. So you're not lowering the bar of quality. You're keeping the quality for everyone, same bar for everyone. but then also EP3, our EP3, effective practices for physics programs. That is a part of the CARE model that we put in place, exposing students, taking the students to graduate schools. Like in Morehouse, we didn't have a graduate school, so we would take our students to neighboring graduate schools so they can get exposure, they can meet some of the faculty. We require the students to also to have at least two summer experiences, REU, and we help them find different summer experiences so that way they are able to connect with different schools, connect with areas of interest that they may have to go on into graduate school or to go into other areas that they may be interested in too. So next slide. The EP3 partnering is something that's going on now. EP3, of course, an acronym for Effective Practices for Physics Programs. And these are something that had just recently occurred where we have partnering with some HBCUs and BSI departments to increase recruitment and retention on their side, but at the same time to have more of a HBCU and BSI input into the EP3 guide and program project. So, and I'm one of the ones in there. I've been also serving on that task force for the past 4 years. So, but it's good to have more voices included. And these are some ways you can also get engaged too. And my next slide is more details associated with that partnering aspects, giving you the goal and the key elements. So for the sake of time, since I am the student who always messes up the time, I will give you a copy of my slides will be available so you can get more detail from that. So I'll now turn it over in the hands of our moderator, Jim Gates. Thank you very much, and I look forward to answering any questions.
Mark, can you put that his slide deck back up? There's one more image that we wanted to get to. It's the final image in his deck. So this EP3, Effective Practices for Physics Programs, this is actually a joint partnership that the APS and the NSF have engaged in. In fact, the NSF has actually given us recently, the APS, support for doing this. So we have space here for other universities to look at this. And this EP3 is actually very important. It's something I've noticed many times. Programs that are aimed at women or aimed at minorities actually benefit everybody. And in fact, if you've been listening to this entire webinar, you might have noticed that the practices that people are talking about, they're not specific to African Americans. They can be applied to students across the board. And so if we are going to up our game as a discipline to be able to attract more of these high-flying students who suddenly might find computer science or data science more attractive, we have got to make ourselves have a higher level performance in terms of engagement students. And EP3 is actually very important for that. The final message I would leave before we take our break is that the question is often asked about African-American or Black institutions. Why do we still need them? And it was addressed somewhat, but let me point out something. We live in a time where none of us can predict the political future of this country. And I have always said over the decades, some of you in the audience may know I was the chairman of the Howard University Physics Department. People wonder why I was there. It's very simple, people. We're in a political time when we don't know what the future is going to be. And just as 1969 marked the first time that institutions generally would accept people who look like me, it can go the other way, folks. And if it does, it's these institutions that will serve as our intellectual life savers, like our intellectual lifeboats. And so it is important to invest in these organizations because who knows what the future brings. And so your partnering with these institutions strengthens them also. And so independent of however our politics works out in the future, we want to keep physics strong by having diverse input, investing in these units, these departments, these universities, whether they be HBCUs or predominantly Black serving institutions, is also a bet on ourselves, folks. And so that's the message I'd like to leave you with. We're at 20 minutes. We're going to take a 10-minute break, so we're going to come back at 3:30. I see that we have around 400 people still watching us. We'll try to work through the Q&A period where you can interact with any of the panelists or myself. And let's take our 10 minutes break. Thank you so much for joining us. I've been sending out shout outs in the chats to lots of friends for those of you who have been watching that. Thank you. Hey folks, it is now 3:30. We promised that we would be rejoining this discussion. We still have over 350 participants out there watching the cybercast, which is actually pretty good because I was watching the numbers and the maximum number that we had today was about 420. So like I said, we've got a pretty good and engaged audience here. So there were a number of questions in a Q&A that people were putting in, and I've had a chance to review them in the 10 minutes, and I'm going to pick out some of them. Let me just say that if we don't get a chance for audience members or viewers, if we don't get to your particular question, we can have the possibility of having them collated, and we will try to address them later. This was done after the first webinar, and so we can, I hope my panelists won't mind me springing this on them suddenly as an added responsibility, but we will try to be as transparent and as responsive as possible. So the first, I wanted to first start with Professor Austin Harton. Are you with us, Austin? I believe so. I see. You wanted to comment a little bit about the perspective of PBIs, principally Black serving institutions. So please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Yeah, and the thing I wanted to say was that one of the I think real components of the educational system that really serves a large number of underrepresented students are the PBIs and MSIs, and basically in a lot of respects we're similar to the HBCUs, but in many ways not. Most of the times we are in urban areas, oftentimes, and basically, and also, a lot of times we have universities that are called PBIs, and if you look at maybe APS's website, it basically lists a lot of schools as PBIs that actually, you say, well, it seems like they're not a majority, they're not majority Black, but typically I think the official status that's used for PBIs is 40%, 40% or more, Black students. So, and what happens is that in many cases we see a lot of students who, because we're in sometimes students who have different types of, circumstances. We actually have students who are working full time, basically have a lot of responsibilities that are quite different from students that are, your traditional students who come to college, straight from high school. So what we end up doing is basically seeing a wide variety of different types of students and actually interacting with students who are in different situations. And I think that that's one of the, the powers of a lot of the PBIs and MSIs is that we take oftentimes a lot of non-traditional students and then provide them with education, because we have a number of students who are actually coming back to get degrees. We have students who come back to get their degrees in physics, and they are maybe grandparents, or things like that, So what happens is we have in many cases work with students who are coming with different situations, and then we have to make accommodations for those things. And I think that that's one of the powers of our particular institutions is that, we have to be flexible, because our student body sometimes is different from the traditional student body. But I think that we provide a great service because we allow students to, who might be coming into the process a little bit later than usual or under different circumstances, we provide opportunities for them to actually, get those degrees. So we've had a lot of students who at Chicago State University who have basically, come from a wide variety of situations. So, okay. And we have students who are actually now in graduate school, working on PhDs. And then we have a lot of students who actually go into, teaching, in the K through 12 arena. So basically we basically have a lot of students who are really using their expertise to, to serve the community in a wide variety of ways.
Thank you for giving that perspective, because as I said, we didn't, unfortunately, in our putting our panel together, we didn't have someone specifically to talk about that part of the system. And I think your presentation is very informative. So we highlighted the Fisk program, but one of our, I see that I have a comment or a question from Dr. Stason from Fisk. Can you unmute yourself, Kayvon? Was it a question or a comment?
No, I didn't have a question or comment, but I'm happy to help address any questions that I can.
Thank you. Maybe some of our other audience members, and I'm glad to hear that we have this extra capacity for dealing with this. Although Dina did a wonderful job, you know, you were one of the originals. So, you know, some people call you one of the OGs for original gangsters. You do know that, right?
I'll keep the hand signals to a minimum, but
thank you very much, Kayvon. Okay, a correction. Someone noted that Dr. Jackson's PhD was the year 1973, 1972, and that's correct. So there was an error in the slide. I just want to make sure that that was dealt with. So we have, as I said, if we don't get your question, we will try to do so after this. But there were some questions that were in the Q&A that we thought brought some larger issues forward. And one of them was, hello, for those who work in private foundations supporting science, how could they best support the efforts for diversifying their grantees? And I throw this question over into the panel for a response for any of you.
Well, one thing, and I'll point out that Stefan Alexander, who is the president of NSBP, I'm the technical officer for NSBP. And one thing is that we've been able to form a collaborative relationship with the Simons Foundation. And so the Simons Foundation chose to go through an organization like NSBP, where we can tap into an underrepresented population, and we can supply them with dedicated, hardworking students who really just need opportunities. And this has led to 28 of our students, half of which are from HBCUs and from some of which are from PWIs, but being able to have an internship over the summer during COVID, of all things, when many of the national laboratories and other REU programs, a lot of them were canceled, or a lot of them were taking on very few students because of the conditions. So if you're working with a foundation, one of the great strengths is pair up, collaborate with an organization, and we can find great students out there who just need someone to mentor them and someone to work with them.
Thank you, Professor Scarlett. Does anyone else wish to respond before I move on to another question?
Yeah, I wanted to add also to, again, also what Carol has shared, but from an industrial point of view too, you can be engaged also in not only providing some of those internships, but also engaging with some of the local institutions, in particular HBCUs, where you may be able to, do some visits and share some of the things that's going on in your industry, so that the students can also see the other different career paths that will lead into, using from the physics, lead into their different areas of interest. So you can also provide that, and even work through NSBP to do many of those type of programs, because that becomes a major vehicle for you to be doing some very similar things, to reaching out for the students and providing those opportunities.
Thank you. Another one of the members of the audience asked, I think, a sort of provocative question. I'd really like to hear the panel deal with this one. The question is, how does one respond to professors/advisors who are not members of the African diaspora, but who still work at HBCUs and still say that they are colorblind and science is science, regarding their indifference to the interests of their African-American students and their performance in physics? So this is a sort of a touchy subject, but I'm kind of interested to hear what your perspective is, because all of you have, like me, we've had experiences at HBCUs, and we know that this is a very real question. And so this is coming from a faculty member who's asking for help. Go ahead, Tabbetha. Please unmute.
Right, I'll tackle this question first and welcome my colleagues to join in. I think that historically, one of the things that has been said about physics, about the culture of physics, is that there is no culture, and that's simply not true. There exists a culture and a setting that we all must live in, and that setting in many places is not welcoming. So for faculty members who sort of say, well, I don't notice, physics is physics, and I don't notice these broader issues, it's very important, if you're interested in supporting your students, that you do make opportunities to understand these issues, make opportunities to understand them independent of trying to burden your student with your lack of knowledge. There are plenty of ways for you to get the information that you need. There are books that are recently have made the bestseller list related to inclusion topics. There are seminars, there are recorded seminars, such as this one will be archived someplace, perhaps in YouTube, where you can really get the information that you need so that you can be informed. But it's very damaging to your students to sort of neglect the societal issues and the things that your students will face when they leave the walls of the HBCU and minority serving institution setting in the broader community and enter into the broader community. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Tabbetha. I think that was very well said. I see Carol indicating that she wishes to speak, but she needs to unmute first.
Okay, so I wanted to just build on what Tabbetha said. People are social creatures at the very bottom of their being. And so if you block someone's ability to be a social creature, to learn and grow by interactions with other people, to collect information, to, you know, have their say, when you block that because of racism, you diminish their ability to function. And diminishing that ability means you diminish their ability to be a scientist. So you can't have this attitude of, well, science is science. Okay, yeah, a math equation, doesn't really care who wrote it down. But at the same time, if a person does not have that sense of well-being, the likelihood that they're going to weather the storm and sit down and focus and write down those math equations and stick with the program, the likelihood goes down. It's just like people have talked earlier. We had a faculty member representing a PBI who said that, look, we sometimes have students that come in and they have children and they have families and they have different conditions. If you don't recognize that, then you can't strategically take down barriers and boundaries to those people being successful. The same thing's true for racism. If you're colorblind and you don't recognize that racism systemically bottlenecks and cuts off opportunities for very specific people and not everybody, and maybe not the people that look like you, but specifically for other people, you can't help take down those barriers. And you're going to keep reproducing the same results, which is a few people will make it through the hazing process, but it's a hazing process. And many people won't make it through the hazing process. And so you will deplete certain populations disproportionately.
Thank you, Professor Scarlett. Willie, I think you were indicating, no, you're not, okay. I just wanted, we had one questioner who wondered about mentoring and tutoring. And so I wanted to just put out for the, I hope this individual is still listening, but there is a national tutoring program that the APS is involved in. And so if you will reach out to the APS with that question, we can put you into a structure, either us or the AAPT, where you can actually be helpful at that level. Okay, so another question that I found very interesting comes to us in the following form. It says, first of all, the viewer said that they found this very informative, and they were wondering if you were from an adjacent program that is not often on the radar, such as geophysics, and this obviously touches on Dr. Dobbins' presentation, and don't have a prior relationship with an HBCU or PBI, how best can you start such a relationship? Please unmute, Tabbetha.
Thank you for the question, Dr. Lithgow Bertoloni. I was just typing a response to your question as
Okay, then I won't use up our.
no, okay. Well, I'll give the short answer. Partnering even across distances is going to be key. I'll pass it to Dr. Quentin Williams at Howard University. I believe they have an atmospheric science degree program, and perhaps that dovetails into geoscience. But the last part of my response is consider attending the NSBP conference, where you can encounter many different HBCU physics departments at one time to sort of try to find your ideal partnership. In particular, the poster session of the students. Some of the students will be doing the exact type of work that you have shown interest in, and so that'll zero you in on the institutions.
Thank you, Dr. Dobbins. And I just want to say that I'm very happy that you gave that shout out to the Atmospheric Science Center at Howard University, because I was its first director and creator of the Science Center there. So it's so wonderful to see that this process that I went through in the early 90s is actually still yielding benefits for people. So thank you so much for that shout out to the center.
Well, maybe I can add a little bit to.
Please do, Quentin.
There. Okay, so the question, as I gathered, was how does one connect and get this ball rolling for some of these adjacent areas? Where, as an example, when I was at Jackson State University, a faculty member at Penn State University reached out from the geosciences area and said, hey, we're looking at trying to do something here in geosciences. We want to increase, diversity and bring more African Americans into it. Let's start a dialogue and see how we can go forward. So fast forward a little bit, we talked over the phone, emails and what have you, and then a proposal came out to the National Science Foundation for establishing a collaboration between Jackson State University and Penn State University. And out of that proposal, we started the first degree program, bachelor's degree program in Earth System Sciences at an HBCU. And so any student that graduated from the program at Jackson State would then move straight through the pipeline to Penn State University, and their graduate expenses we were paid for. But the curriculum was designed together, working collaboratively, and we ended up getting students into the field of geoscience. So that's just from an example of what can happen just through conversations and dialogue and a little effort.
Thank you. I have a question from a African-American faculty member at a predominantly PWI, sorry. He says, over the past quarter century, I've tried to do what I can, which has mainly been making myself available to give talks, lectures, workshops, etc. But clearly, this is not enough. Therefore, my question is this. Given that we each have a finite amount of time, what are the 2 or 3 things I can do beyond what I already do, which is known to make a measurable difference? So this is an African-American faculty member, PBI institution, wants to make a difference in the HBCU and PBI world. Comments? Kayvon, do you want to talk to, maybe lead off on that one?
Repeat the question, please, Jim.
I'm sorry. So this is an African-American scholar, a faculty member at a PBI, but he wants to make a difference in within the HBCU community, the institutions that are serving Africans. So the question is, what can he do beyond giving talks, lectures, and workshops? What do you think would be efficacious? Because you face this in thinking about setting up, obviously, the partnership between Fisk and Vanderbilt. So how would you respond?
Yeah, well, based on that experience in developing the partnership between Fisk and Vanderbilt, I mean, I think it has always been the case that at the very heart of that institutional partnership is research-based collaboration and partnership between individual faculty and labs. And, when you think about what it is that we're trying to achieve ultimately with many of these institutional partnerships is, we're trying to support and advance the students in their own career trajectories. And for the business that we are all in, meaningful research experiences, engagement with faculty mentors, but ultimately with, with doing the science as the foundation, that's the engine that drives it all at the end of the day. And that is something that even within an institutional context is a way that individual faculty can really make a difference. Reach out to the colleagues that you know at the other institution and ask the question, if we had to work together on something, given what my expertise is and what your expertise is, what could we work on together? Never mind that we weren't already working together on something intentionally, but if we wanted to start intentionally working on something together, what might that be? And how could we start? And then let's start identifying some funding opportunities to get it going. And then that will kind of be the, in my experience, that'll be the engine that drives the collaboration long-term. And that will be how the students benefit from the institutional transitions and handoffs and the development of a mentored research culture between the two.
Thank you. Does another panelist wish to deal with this issue, this question?
I would, yeah, I will take a stab at it. I would say that if I don't know your research area, but if your research area has some components to it that are sort of esoteric, maybe it's coding, maybe it's a particular technique that you use, it would be wonderful to run a workshop on that particular topic at an institution where such a expert that topic area, the expertise in that topic area doesn't exist. To build the workshop, write the workshop, deliver the workshop along with your students or other colleagues on the campus of the HBC or PBI. And those types of relationships, those types of opportunities really give you a chance to grab a large number of students. And out of that set of students, there will be a smaller group who may decide to pursue this topic area that they might never have encountered had you not built such a tutorial or workshop. So that's my suggestion.
Thank you. There's one question here I think that really merits our focus and attention. It comes from an attendee who says, as a woman physicist, we must also consider sexism, especially for female students in physics. This is rampant at both HBCUs and PWIs. Another emerging issue is the fact that many faculty in physics departments are international in origin, and they bring with them their own country's biases against women. And so this whole issue of bias against women is at least as large a problem. And so I'd like to have the panel talk about this. And as the questioner says, it's true at both HBCUs and at PWIs. And so one of our colleagues is, I think I would like to call out, she's the chairman of a physics department. And so could I entice you to deal with this issue at an HBCU? Yes, unmute.
Chairwoman or chairperson.
Chairperson.
So I think that yes, definitely there is a concern of sexism and that intersection with racism when you are a woman of color in physics. And for me, I think we need to be sensitive in terms of what are women students looking for in terms of careers, and how does that intersect with possibilities of the work life or the personal and professional balance. So I think these are things that perhaps women students might be more interested in, and hopefully faculty and advisors will keep those things in mind, but not judge those students as lesser than or distracted from physics.
Thank you, Dr. McNeese. As I was looking at the questions, I thought this is a perfect question. Although Dr. McNeese is shy, I believe she is the first female chair of her department. Is that correct, Dr. McNeese?
As far as since the department became an official department, yes.
So we have a trailblazer here, and whoever asked the question, perhaps I would invite you to reach out to Dr. McNeese and have a deeper and more substantial discussion about this set of issues. She certainly is a model for achievement where we are looking at a different barrier than what's the focus here. There's a comment from a faculty member which I'd like to have you respond to. And it's something that in some sense has undergirded your discussion throughout, but I think it merits revisiting. It says, a concern is that I have seen I applaud the comments from the speakers. A comment that is too often heard in discussions is about the underpreparation of underrepresented minority students. A concern that I have seen far too many times is that even well-prepared minority students fall out. Too often, faculty simply see underrepresented students as simply being unprepared. How do we start the discussion among faculty that addresses the preconception that get in the way of increasing the yield? And I see, let me call Dr. Rockward, and then I'll return to you, Dr. McNeese.
Allow me to jump into that one hot and heavy. And I'm going to share my experience when I was at Morehouse College. We had that same, and the Morehouse, all male college, HBCU, and well, right next door to Spelman. And had the same dilemma with my faculty, who primarily Black, saying that our students was not prepared. And so how I kind of tackled that problem is that I looked at our data. I showed my faculty at the time how we did our introductory courses and the number of students we were getting into our calculus-based mechanics and E&M and so forth, and showed them actually the numbers over the course of 20 years of data, you know, of the department, to see that, okay, it's not necessarily the students. It was us. We were our problem. And once I showed that to them, they saw that, I said, look at the trend. We're getting over 100 students coming into this class, this mechanics class, first class, and by the time we get to the third session, we only got about 10 coming out. Now look at their SAT scores. Many of them come in taking Calculus 1 and have taken Calculus 1, so they're prepared mathematically. I'm saying, like, you know, at some point we got to come to a realization that it's not necessarily the student, it is us. And so what we did to do this, we tried a little experiment. We moved ourselves around. We took some of us out who traditionally wanted to, you know, stay in that course, and moved that one to another course, and we did a little shuffle, and we tried it for 2 semesters. In 2 semesters, our percentage went up from 3 semesters. Our percentage went up from about 100 students coming in our first sequence course to the students coming out. 100 coming in, it used to be 10. Now we had 100 going in and 40 coming out. Just that one little, so we just are realizing that sometimes we're not necessarily doing things wrong. We're just not doing things efficiently and effectively for that particular, you know, for our set of students. So we moved ourselves around. Okay. And sometimes that's what happens.
Yeah. Before we continue, let me point out that it's 2 minutes to 4. I've been informed by Mr. Doyle, the Chief Information Officer of the APS, that we can let this session run longer. So I wanted to make everyone who, because we still have around 315 people still out there listening, and some of them probably will want their questions gotten to. And so I wanted to just tell everyone that, first of all, thank you for participating. We were scheduled to stop at 4. If your life is set up so that you have to leave us, we just thank you for being here, and we hope it was informative and useful for you. If you can stay with us, please do. We're, as I said, we've been informed that we have this additional capacity for engaging you. And unless some of the panelists have these sharp boundaries, I would invite them to stay with us also. So Marta, I wanted to get that in before 4 o'clock, but you now have the floor.
So I would just say that for a small liberal arts college, I think we may share similar problems with other small colleges. It's not an HBCU specific thing, in the sense that, again, given the students that we have, the courses that we have to teach, Our students will not have 2 semesters of quantum. They will not have 2 semesters of electricity and magnetism because we don't have the faculty to be able to teach that. That doesn't mean that if they go somewhere, or perhaps now that COVID has seen us online for courses, they may be able to pick it up elsewhere or as soon as they get to a graduate school. So I think we need to not use that under preparation as some reason why we're not willing to put in the work or provide the options to help students get to where they need to be.
Thank you. There's a question from one gentleman. I don't know if he's still with us, but his question was, as the diversity manager at the University of X, which I won't name, I would like to visit HBCUs once COVID allows to discuss education and research opportunities. Who should I contact? And how many faculty/students should he bring with him? So does anyone want to deal with that question? I guess my first answer is that part of the documentation from this webinar is a list of HBCUs and MSIs, which was my presentation. And this individual could use that as a resource to try to pick out some convenient places. Beyond that, does someone else have another suggestion?
No, I would just recommend that they contact the administrative offices at those departments. So that would consist of the department chair and maybe the administrative assistant, and inquire about that. And oftentimes we are definitely willing to allow a person to come in during a seminar to give a special type of seminar on career opportunities as well. And they can come in and bring their information and disseminate it and meet students and faculty alike.
Thank you, Quentin.
Jim, I may add a comment, just building on something that I said before. I would say that a very important consideration when you're thinking about making a visit to an HBCU potential partner institution, and you have in mind the idea of developing a research collaboration or a collaboration of some kind, very important that you come with an as open a mindset as possible as to the range of possibilities for what that collaboration can really look like, right? We all get to a point where we really hyper specialize in our research and what our labs do and the things that we train our students in. And the chances that visiting a particular school and hoping that there's going to be some existing research expertise in that same exact very narrow thing, it could just lead to some disappointment. But if you approach it with an openness to, as I said before, these are the kinds of things that we do at University of X. Let's see what are the kinds of things that y'all do at school Y, and let's find what the possibilities can be for connection. I think that will ultimately be more fruitful.
Thank you. Kevin, I believe you might have had another question that you thought would be good for the panel to deal with.
Yeah, so I'm thinking about the various things that that have been discussed during this webinar so far. So I'm imagining, suppose that you are a faculty member at a PhD granting institution, perhaps a highly regarded research university, and you're thinking about engaging with these issues. The reality is that many of our institutions, sometimes especially those most highly ranked research universities, suffer from what you might call a reputational deficit when it comes to student support, student mentoring, supportive environments. My question to the panelists here would be, if you can reflect on, when you think about advising your students and which PhD programs they might want to consider, which labs and advisors out there might they want to consider? And you're doing the hard, honest questioning of yourself. Which institutions do I believe my students will be successful at and will be taken care of and will be mentored and supported? What might a faculty member at one of those universities that currently suffers from a reputational deficit, what can they do internally to make their programs better and more supportive? And this is really sort of the crux of my question to you, is what can their department institution do to help make sure that the larger universe of institutions becomes aware of the work that that department institution is doing internally to become better, to be more supportive?
So go ahead, Willie, unmute yourself, please.
Yeah, that's a great question, Kayline. The first thing that came to my mind is what happened to me and to my good friend Quentin, that helped us when we were going through our program at Georgia Tech some 20 years ago. But nevertheless, is cohort recruiting. Okay, many times those institutions that are in that deficit model are pretty much bringing in 1 or 2 students that are underrepresented minority students, and then unable to give the full support or even some support. But sometimes, what we found out is that when you bring in a nice cohort, deliberately bring in a cohort of 5 or so students, maybe every other year, you kind of start bringing in also a fairly community type of network. These students beginning to be able to formulate their own type of community within that community, so that they can begin to achieve. And then that faculty or several faculties, especially that faculty, needs to recruit or see other faculty in the department who are also supportive of these things, so they can create more of a support structure. Okay, and not that you do anything different, it's that you're making sure that these students, that they come in, this cohort comes in, that you're guiding them, you're making sure that they have someone they can go to ask these tough questions, to ask about, basic questions any student should have in graduate school for sure. What they would have been, questions in classical mechanics or with Jackson E&M and things like that. And we went through this model, we called ourselves, our study model, the black hole. And that alone helped us to begin to start realizing and distinguishing some things that had nothing to do with the race or the culture. It's just the toughness of physics, okay? But because we had a model that we had several faculty at Georgia Tech who were able to engage with us in different areas, in different arenas, and we had a cohort to see that, okay, we're not the only one there. We began able to start, okay, really get engaged into that culture and making a difference.
Thank you. We are now at 4:07. I propose to go another 8 minutes because that would put us 15 minutes over our schedule. I think that's probably not appropriate. We still have about 252 folks out there watching, so it's not that we have had a collapse. I'm amazed at people's stamina to sit here like this. I'm going to direct a question to Dina. The question sort of comes from someone asking, and I ask you, Dina, because I know that you're up on the data that comes out of the Fisk-Vanderbilt program. That's why I'm going to direct the question to you, Dina. The question looks as follows. It says, one of the problems with hiring Black faculty is that we get so few applicants from Black physicists, but I know there are qualified people out there who are not applying. Can you discuss some of the reasons why Black physicists tend to move away from academia? And like I said, since you're on top of the numbers, I would suspect that perhaps you've seen some of that discussion. What can institutions and departments do to encourage more Black applicants? So Dina, you have the floor.
Well, so and I'll definitely yield to my more senior colleagues, but as those who are making sort of hiring decisions. But our students, go into all kinds of different fields, and a lot of them, move towards industry jobs. I mean, some are in academic jobs, but I think honestly, there's a bit of burnout from the culture of academia for a lot of folks by the time they get through this process, and not just sort of the culture of academia, but the unwelcomeness of the climate. I think, and then wanting to walk into one of those situations and you're the only one. It's so hard to be a trailblazer. It takes so much energy and so much of your reserves. And so you know, I mean, I can't speak for those students, but I do see that folks get to the end and they're like, you know what, this is, I want to keep doing research, I want to keep doing science, but this experience is enough for me. So we'd have to make some, you know, we need to make some cultural changes. These places are welcoming and interested. But yeah, and then I will definitely defer.
Thank you, Dina. That was a great answer. And I think that, Tabbetha, I see your hand, please.
Yeah, I echo Dina's answer as in burnout at the end of the PhD process, but I want to point to other ways to sort of attract students into academia who might experience the burnout or who might not. I heard of this method from Mary James. She was co-chair of the Team Up report sponsored by the American Institute of Physics. And she talked about a model that exists where groups of potential candidates, so these would be senior PhD students nearly done with their degree or postdoctoral scholars, are brought in for the purpose of helping them understand the process of applying to a faculty position, and then helping them understand what happens as a faculty member. How do you develop your lab? How do you develop your career? And they're brought in a large group of, say, 20, and it's not for the purpose of directly recruiting those students, but just offering them a training opportunity where they can begin to work on their faculty package and other things that might not have been at the forefront of their mind while they were deep into that PhD project. So I offer that up as one of the other ideas to try to ensure that we keep generating faculty members who are coming from the Black community and other minoritized communities.
Thank you.
Jim, might I add another perspective?
Please.
I think it could also be a statistical issue as well too. Just think about if only 13 receive PhDs, right? And let's say these faculty positions that are available, you typically have to have a PhD in physics to go into one. So to get into the faculty position, you typically have to have a postdoc or have had a postdoc or something like that. So if you take, let's say 13 PhDs and some of them go on postdocs, what have you, well, now industry is buying after them as well. So industry is going to pay higher or what have you. And so let's say that you have, you know, half of that number go to industry. Now you're down to just a handful for 750 some odd institutions that may be looking for an African-American physicist. The likelihood of them receiving an application, I think, is very small.
Well, that is certainly the numerical reality, Quentin. I found an interesting question from a teacher. The individual says, I'm a white high school physics teacher at a highly regarded private school. Do the panelists think I should encourage my students of color to attend an HBCU, a small liberal arts college, or a larger university? My own bias is for smaller liberal arts colleges. How would the panelists respond? I see Marta indicating that she, and then Willie. So Marta, go ahead, please unmute.
So I'm thinking all of the above, encourage them to do all of that. And perhaps they may not know about HBCUs, so give them some information on that. But the important thing is to be encouraging.
Thank you. Willie, you want to add something?
That's the exact same answer I was going to give him is you really got to look at the student. And when you engage with the student, some students will fit well in the HBCU, some will fit well in the PBI, some will fit well as a small liberal arts. You have to look at the student, and if you got a good reputation, a good rapport with the student, you will be able to steer them in the right direction. But in the meantime, have them apply to all of them. Have them, ask them what their list of institutions that they would consider. And you may nudge one or two of them in there, but the most of all, let them apply to all of them and encourage them to apply. But the bottom line is applying. Encouraging them. The bottom line is encouraging them.
Thank you. So I promised we would run to 4:15. I have 30 seconds. I want to thank all of the people who are out there still viewing us. We still have over 200 people online. I also would like to remind people that this has been recorded and it will be archived at the APS. And so if you, or if you have friends that you think would benefit from having been part of this experience, please go to the APS webpage on the Delta Phi movement, because this is a coalition of organizations, and you'll find the record of this. The other thing I wanted to say is thank you. Thank you for your perseverance, your stamina, for sitting for over 2 hours in front of a computer screen and listening to people deal with this rather difficult issue. We all know that talking about race in this country is extraordinarily difficult. And talking about at the time in which we are moving is actually adding to that difficulty. However, the only way I know that this nation will make progress is through these hard discussions. And that's why I want to remind people about that Kennedy quote. We must do this hard thing. It is hard, but it must be done in a way that is respectful for the dignity of everyone involved in the conversation. And this is what we hold as a high value for these. The other thing I want to tell the audience is that we've actually got in the works 2 more of these webinars on the horizon. We're not quite sure of the time for the first one, but it will be dedicated solely to the Team Up report. And I'm sure Dr. Dobbins, Professor Dobbins, is going to want to weigh in on that. And so I encourage you to keep an eye out for the announcement for our next Delta Phi webinar. As I said, the sole focus will be the Team Up report. And then during February, Black History Month, we have a very special program planned. I'm not going to be revealing more than that, but we think it's going to be something spectacular with some really accomplished and people who have not only talked the talk, but have demonstrably walked the walk and had impact on how one changes the culture of discipline. So with this, I'm going to sign off. Again, I thank everyone who's obviously on screen, and for your valuable contributions and for your patience with all of my frailties as I try to guide this process. You have been an amazing group to work with, and I am so honored and happy that we were all able to come together for this. And also to our viewers, as I said, we will be doing this again. So tell your friends, come back. It's going to be a different subject, and it's something that if you found this of value, I think we can continue to add value to your experiential and knowledge base in this difficult arena. So thank you again.